Hat, sunglasses, Pepsi, notes, sources, thick skin, check. You already know. Let's go. Welcome to Golden Blue today, everybody. This is a college football channel. So if you like college football, hit the like and subscribe button. It's that simple. Also, send gear to represent your team and be a part of my background forever. All you have to do is send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. And don't forget to check out our Patreon page. We have a lot of great perks over there. The perk that people seem to enjoy the most, of course, is the score prediction contest where we award $20 every single week to whoever gets closest to the actual score of the game that I pick. We also did a championship week. I will award $25 to that winner. And right now is the best time to join Patreon because we are going to do the bowl prediction contest. First place prize will win $50. Second place prize is an autographed Golden Blue flat bill hat. And the third place prize is a shout out. And the more Patreons we get, the higher we can bump up the prize. So if we get up to $300 worth of Patreon pledges, we will bump up the prize to $75. If we get up to $400 worth of Patreon pledges, we'll bump the prize up to $100, and so on and so forth. So there's even an incentive for current Patreon members to encourage other people to join Patreon. That way the prize goes even higher. I'll leave the link to the Patreon page in the description of this video. Caroline, who's still in the Caroline? Yeah, that's me going to Blue Dude, and it is still raining. But once again, the Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff and the Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark proves just how different they think. They are going in total different directions. The Pac-12 is being very, very passive, and the Big 12 is starting to get very, very aggressive. Now, there for a while, the Big 12 was also passive, and it cost them dearly. They've lost a lot of big brands because they were being passive. Well, now they're turning aggressive, and it looks like the Big 12 is trying to make some big moves. But as far as the Pac-12 goes, it doesn't look good for the Pac-12. So here's some of the tweets that I saw about George Kliavkoff. This one's from Brent McMurphy. Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff said, quote, he doesn't see any sense of urgency, and this is regarding media right deal completion. You don't see any sense of urgency. This is how much money your conference is going to make and how long they can make it with a certain TV network. But there's no sense of urgency. Yeah, that's a great business decision right there. Come on, man. Then Matt Brown had to say this. George Kliavkoff reiterates that the timeline for the Pac-12 will be to complete a media rights deal first, then a grant of rights agreement, and then pursue expansion. That one, I guess, makes sense. You do want to get that media right deal in first. The grant of rights is very, very important, and hopefully the Pac-12 is serious about expansion. But I'm okay with that. Brett McMurphy also says, Pac-12's George Kliavkoff said a decision on Pac-12 expansion will be determined after league's media right deal is done. So that kind of corroborates with what Matt Brown said. Dennis Dodd said, George Kliavkoff on Twitter handle @Pac12 officiating. Here's what he said. One of the officiating crews lost track of it down earlier this season. This just can't happen. That's embarrassing, and we're not going to do that again. You think? I mean, it happened on national television. He's talking about the Oregon-Washington State fiasco. That was crazy. How do you miss something like that? Of course that can't happen. Of course it can't happen again. Of course it's embarrassing. You're stating the obvious. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. So the Pac-12, it looks like a chicken with its head cut off just running around not knowing what it's supposed to do or when it's supposed to do it. This is where the Pac-12 is in major trouble. They have bad leadership. They don't know what's going on. They don't correct mistakes when it happens. They wait till later after the mistake is very, very obvious, and you've become the laughingstock of all of college football. Once again, you were so close to getting to the playoffs, but USC drops the ball and you have a 3-loss champion in Utah. And congratulations to Utah. I do think you were the best team in the Pac-12, but you have got to stop losing multiple games in the regular season and then win the Pac-12 championship. That hurts the Pac-12. I'm fine with you winning the Pac-12 championship, but stop losing games earlier in the season. That just hurts the Pac-12. Now let's talk about the Big 12 and how big of a difference as far as leadership goes. First up, here's what Nicole Arbach said about the Big 12 commissioner. It says, Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, we'd love to get into that 4th time zone, and we will at some point. So Brett Yormark is stating that the Big 12 will get into that 4th time slot, and that's the West Coast. So we're talking about teams that are on the West Coast. Alright, let's look down the list of potential candidates and which ones I think he's going to pursue the most. Well, first there's the group of 5. I would say San Diego State, Fresno State, and Boise State. Those 3 could be candidates, but the problem is, in the new grant of rights and TV deal, there is no guarantee that they will bump up the value of the TV deal if they add a group of 5 team. So I would say no to those 3 teams, even though I think they're the best brands in the group of 5, and I actually think they would be good additions. It wouldn't make sense because of the TV deal. What about the other teams? Cal. No, I don't think Cal would make sense at all. I don't think they add any value. And the Big 12 doesn't put a preference on academics. That's more of the Big 10. Same thing with Stanford, although I do think Stanford has a better brand, and maybe they do bring in some value, but there's better options out there. So I would say no to Stanford. Then there's Washington State. I would actually say yes to Washington State because Washington State has one of the biggest fan bases in all the nation. In fact, it's a top 25. One of the biggest in the Pac-12 right now. So I would say yes to Washington State as long as you add somebody with them that's close to Washington State, because travel to Washington State would be a bit difficult. You could also look at Oregon State. I think Oregon State is in the same boat as Washington State. Not quite as good of a brand, not quite as big of a fan base, but I still think Oregon State does bring a draw. But the 2 biggest brands would, of course, be Washington and Oregon, and we all know they're trying to get into the Big Ten. They actually applied to get into the Big Ten. The Big Ten has turned them down for the time being. Maybe in the future, the Big Ten does add Washington, Oregon. Remember, they just add UCLA and USC, so maybe they just need some time before they've added USC and UCLA and then add Washington and Oregon. But still, I would put Washington and Oregon at the top of the list of the Big 12 if you are trying to get into that 4th time zone. But still, Washington State and Oregon State, those aren't bad consolation prizes. I would still try to get those 2 brands if you can't get Washington or Oregon. Here's a tweet from Dennis Dodd on Brett Yormark. He says, Brett Yormark on expansion. Over the course of the not too distant future, I would expect things to happen. So once again, Brett Yormark is saying things are going to happen, and it's going to happen in the not too distant future. Like I said before, I still think that Fresno State and Boise State are pretty good brands. They just don't guarantee any revenue as far as adding revenue. So I don't think the Big 12 will go after those brands. However, for the Pac-12, I think it would be a good idea if they went after some of those brands in the Mountain West. I think at the top of the list, you would have to put San Diego State. They're investing a lot of money into their football facilities. They just built a new football stadium for their football team. And remember, the Pac-12 is losing 2 Southern California universities to the Big Ten. So at least that would keep a footprint in Southern Cal for the Pac-12. I know the brand is nowhere close to a UCLA or USC, but still, it keeps your footprint in the southern part of the state of California. So I put San Diego State at the top of the list as far as teams the Pac-12 could add from the Mountain West. But on top of San Diego State, Boise State. Now, this might be 10 years too late. Personally, I think the Pac-12 should have added Boise State a long time ago. But of course, they look down on Boise State. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and that's exactly what the Pac-12 might be looking at. And with the Big 12 not being interested in Boise State because of revenue problems, then Boise State might accept, even though they still might be holding a grudge against the Pac-12 for not accepting them sooner rather than later. But on top of Boise State, you could add Fresno State out of the Mountain West. That's another school in the state of California. I know Fresno State and San Diego State can't compare with USC and UCLA as far as brand recognition, but at least it bumps your numbers up. And finally, Colorado State, just to round out the numbers. And you could bring in Colorado State, whether it's to try to keep Colorado or whether it's to try to replace Colorado with a footprint in the state of Colorado. So that's a win-win as far as bringing in Colorado State. Maybe it helps you keep Colorado because I know the Big 12 is interested in Colorado, and now the Big 10 might be interested in Colorado because of the hire of Deion Sanders. I've done several videos on that. So y'all let me know in the comments section, do you think the Pac-12 does add some of these Mountain West teams to make up for some of these losses? And do you think the Big 12 will eventually be able to get a Washington or an Oregon or a Washington State or an Oregon State? And with the losses of UCLA and USC and possibly more in the future, do you think the Pac-12 will never reach the playoffs again? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.